Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Empower You. I'm Betty Overstreet, the Executive Director. This is November 3rd. Can you believe we only have 5 classes left after tonight? I don't know what we're going to do when it's over, but guess we'll find something to do, won't we? Just want to thank the board members that are here tonight. Bill Roll, who's in the back, our treasurer, Jay Grunke, Ken Bowman, and of course, our managing board member, Dan Reganall. I want to thank those of you that have been donating so generously to help in our cause to bring classes to you. If you haven't donated and you want to, there's several ways you can do that. When you sign up online, there's a donate button. On our website, there's a donate button. And also, if you're in the studio, we always pass around our red buckets. If you have $1 or $2 you want to put in, we do appreciate that. Want to remind you also that our classes are posted to the website within 24 hours of the class. So if you've missed a class, you can go on the website and watch it. This class will be up by 4 o'clock tomorrow. And also, our speaker tonight would like for you to hold your classes till the end of his presentation. What did I say, questions? Hold your questions till the end of his presentation. If you're here in the studio and you have a question, please raise your hand and one of us will bring a microphone to you. If you're not speaking in a microphone, the people online can't hear you. Anybody sitting in back of you can't hear you either. And if you're online and you have a question, just scroll down to the bottom of your screen to the Q&A button and put your message in there. The classes that we have coming up next, tomorrow we have Booker T. Washington, Professor Gregory McBrayer from Ashland University will be here talking about the Booker T. Washington, who is a history figure that often gets forgotten. We also have on our website 2 documents that the speaker would like for you to read if you can beforehand. One of them's on struggling for an education and democracy and education. If you read these before the class, it'll give you a little bit understanding when he presents his material to you. And then before him, our Take 20 speaker is going to be Corrine Vidals. She's an attorney and lobbyist at the Center for Christian Virtue. She's also the author of the Backpack Bill. And what is the Backpack Bill? That means if you have a child in public school and you want to put them in another school, the dollars that are for them in the public school, they can take those with them to another school. So let's hope that bill gets passed. I know there's a lot of parents that would like for that to happen. Next Tuesday, Professor Al Toothfarber will be back with us. I think he's been with us at least once a year talking about different things. Last time he was here, he talked on China. This time he's going to be talking about macro changes in the United States. When I talked to him back in August or early September and scheduled him for this class, we talked about all the changes that, COVID has brought about. But I am sure whatever he planned in September has all changed by now. So I'm kind of anxious to hear him and see what he has to say. Next, we have our door prizes to give away. So get out your little tickets and Dan's going to come out and give those out.
Let's give Betty a round of applause, our executive director. Thank you, Betty. Help me pick a couple. We're going to give away 2 copies of John's great book, which I had a chance to start reading earlier in the summer. It ends in 790 for a copy of Bellwether Blues. Who's got 90 right here? Georgia has. Let's give Georgia a round of applause. And we will be giving, we're going to give the other one away online. We're going to give away the other copy online. It's good to see so many people joining us tonight online. Welcome here. I thought I should just talk a minute about the election yesterday, because I know some of you have been kind of interested in some of these school board contests, how some of the candidates did. And I kind of had a chance to talk to several people today about it. So I wanted to just fill you in. So the Enquirer called me today. They're going to do a big story about the school board candidates and critical race theory. And of course, they'll go along with their tagline. And the Enquirer always has the exact same tagline. I've seen it now in 19 articles they've written about critical race theory. And that is, well, experts say it's not in K through 12. It always is the exact same wording. So a reporter called me today and I said, we need to talk about that that kind of narrative that you've got and why you're continuing with it. But when we talked about it, her kind of concept in her mind about the article was the only reason people are working on school board issues is because of CRT. And I told her I thought that was not the case, that I thought that candidates were more concerned about really four things. And I said at the top of the list, I thought they were concerned about masks and mandates. Everywhere I went, that seemed to be the main thing. We've got somebody who is a school board winner here who's going to tell us in a minute. Second thing would be about critical race theory and divisive racist subjects. Third thing about school boards going woke and not really looking at what they're teaching their students. And the fourth thing is comprehensive sexuality education and social emotional learning. So how did we do last night? I originally I thought we won about 40% of our races. It may be a little bit higher than that. In Forest Hills, which was super organized, they had about 80 to 100 parents that met every week, I think for 12 weeks or so. They won 4 out of 4 seats there. They did fantastic. In Lakota, 2 or 3. We won 2 seats. The first seat was the person who came in first was Isaac, who spoke here at Empower You about 2 weeks ago. So I hope you got a chance to meet Isaac. And number 2 is one of our guests here tonight, Darby. Let's give her a round of applause. And I've asked Darby to say a few words. Come on up, Darby. This is exciting.
Thank you so much. So yeah, this is a fabulous, I guess, ending to our campaign. We have 2 seats out of 3. We would, and thank you to Dan for, all of the information you've been putting out there for Stop Critical Race Theory and helping the students and the community understand what really is in our school system. And masks, is one of the things that we were concerned about. However, as of Monday, this week, we were parents' choice. So they changed that right before the election, which was good. So thank you for the parents who are fighting for our community and for our parents' choice. So I can't wait to see what the future holds. And Isaac and I respect him so much, and we have worked so hard together. And I look forward to the next 4 years. Thank you.
One more round of applause for the winner. Congratulations. So I'm told we picked up 2 seats in Milford. I don't know about that. We picked up what set? 2 out of 3 seats in Milford. I'm told we picked up 1 seat in Loveland. I'm told we picked up 3 seats in Oak Hills. And we picked up a very important seat. Yes. 2 in Lebanon. 2 in Claremont Northeastern. Excellent. 1 in Little Miami District. We also picked one of the seats off for the Hamilton County ESC. That's called the Educational Service Center for Hamilton County. And that's the group that's been running around writing these racist equity agreements that are in every school that your kids go to. So we now at least have 1 board member on that. And there were lots of wins up north. There's some of the cities up there that I heard about that we had different candidates win in. And we had some pretty good losses too. I don't want to underestimate them. Sycamore, we lost bad in Sycamore. And in Kings, we had 3 great candidates running for school board that a lot of us got to know, work with, like. They all lost. And I was told by somebody in Sycamore that the reason we lost there was because the teachers union was so deeply established in Sycamore. It could take a few years before candidates can really break through, which I can kind of understand. So overall, when we started this movement, I guess back in May, I never really thought about school boards, but I think we've had a big impact on school boards, and I think we've got the potential to continue, and that's just a great thing. So Kelly Kohls is going to be here tonight, to talk to us about school boards. I'm so glad to have her here. We've kind of known each other for a long time, and she's just a real freedom activist, an educator, a businesswoman with an extensive background in healthcare and education. She has seen politics and public education change in ways that citizens don't fully understand. She alerts citizens. She's a leader of several statewide and county organizations, and she travels the state of Ohio at her own expense, educating the public on why education is failing our students and why Common Core is not the answer. She presents not only the problems, but solutions and recommendations. She's the current president of the Ohio Republican PAC, whose mission it is to recruit, select, and assist candidates for office that will strictly adhere to the U.S. Constitution. Let's welcome Kelly Kohls. Kelly, we're glad to have you.
Thank you. Yep.
Monitor in a second.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dan, and thanks everybody for being and all the listeners online. I am Kelly Kohls. I was elected to the Springboro School Board in 2010. My 4 years ended in 2014. I was also then appointed to the Warren County Career Center School Board. So I served on 2 public school boards. And I learned a lot in 4 years. When I ran my campaign, Darby, you'll enjoy this, it was really rough because I was the only one that wasn't towing the line. I was a no voter on the levy. I made that clear. I put the no sign at the end of my driveway. I was clearly an outlier to the internal workings of the district. And of course, the teachers union endorsed the other 3 candidates. The newspaper endorsed the other 3 candidates, but I got more votes than any of them. So it turned out just fine. It says that the community wanted something different. And I just said, look, I don't know if you need the money. They had been on the ballot 4 times. We had said no 4 times. I just thought that we should start listening to the community, right? And that just wasn't popular inside the brick and mortar buildings there, but it was fairly popular evidently in the community. So I got on the school board and I learned a lot in 4 years. I learned that if you're trying to hold the system accountable, it's very reluctant to let you inside. That if you want to ask questions, you're treated like, a mean bully outlier. You're a micromanager. They called me lots of things. I said, I know that school board members are supposed to create policy, right? We're supposed to do the mission, the vision, the strategic plan. How can I do any of that if I don't understand the details? I'm just asking for the details. So all I did was ask questions, and I had no idea it would meet with so much resistance. But within a couple months, when I would bring the rest of the story, administration would tell us partial bits that we needed to know to make the decision they wanted us to make. And I would bring the rest of the story to the other board members because I would do my homework. The other board members started trusting me, and we started voting together. Instead of 4 to 1, 4 to 1, 4 to 1, I would read a paragraph or 2 on why I voted the way I did. I asked my other board members to just vote their conscience, and they did. They said, that's what we're doing. I said, that's fine, but I wonder if you're doing it without all the information. So here's the rest of the story. And they often said, okay, I'm with her. I'm not with the administration. And we started voting the same. We started doing some significant things. And in 2013, the Dayton Daily News, who had spent 3 years writing negative articles about Kelly Kohls, finally wrote an article saying that unlike the other districts in all of Warren County, our price tag per pupil had declined significantly and our academic success had increased. So it can be done, right? But not without a lot of grief, not without a lot of pushback. And that 4 years, I had no one to go to. I didn't know who could answer my questions, but I started reaching out to people I thought would know. And boy, were there a lot of smart people out there that helped me a lot. I learned a tremendous amount in those 4 years, so much so that I thought I'm not going to run again. I need to go across the state and tell people what is happening in public education, that it is not run by the community. That's a joke. The legislators can stand there and tell you that we're a local control state. That's not true. We're completely controlled by the teachers union. And the teachers union is who lobbies to get more people added to the system. Not about academics. Let me show you a little bit here. Okay, so education, national education, saving children from this failing education system involves every single person here. And when Dan started talking about what we have to do today to start getting people elected in the next election, which is in 2 years, we have to start today, getting their name out there, educating them on what the topics are that they need to talk about. Because the union did that. There was an article we came across, the union president in Springboro wrote an article quite proud of himself, saying that the day after I was elected, they set their machine into gear. And they did. They went across the whole Springboro community and they told people everywhere that Kelly Kohls is crazy. Now, they didn't tell them why I was crazy, because they would have said, well, what exactly did she do? Well, she's just crazy. That's what they did. Every time they went into a beauty salon, every time they went to get gas, groceries, wherever they were, Kelly Kohls is crazy, because they had nothing else to say. What I wanted was to put the children first. Is that so bad? But they couldn't say that. They'd have to say she's crazy, right? So, okay, know why it's failing. You have to know why it's failing to then address the problem and come up with a solution. So here you go. The teachers union is in full control of public education. And they came about in the 60s and 70s. And when did the Federal Department of Education come into play? 1972. Okay. And so here's what I wanted to tell you. If you go to YouTube, you will see that there are two national teachers unions groups. One is the AFT, American Federation of Teachers. One is the NEA, National Education Association. In this YouTube video, I wanted you to know that the president of the teachers union said, the teachers union does not exist because we care about children, nor do we care about a great public school for every child. We exist because people are willing to give us millions of dollars a year to advance public employees, right? So they're not there for the kids. That's okay. It's a business. I'd call it a racket sometimes, but it's a business and they've been very successful. Okay, so here's what I want to show you. This was done, I thought it was the Heartland Institute. I'm not positive, but there is a reference there real small. But the red line on top is the non-teaching staff that have been added since 1970. So it all starts at 1970. Do you see how many adults have been added to the education system? Okay, then the yellow line is total staff, and the blue line is teaching staff added to education since the 1970s. The black line at the bottom, everybody, is enrollment. So do you see they've been very effective at lobbying to get more and more and more people added to the system? Do you think it's improved our academics? In fact, it's done the opposite. Okay, so here's another reference here. So since the 1950s, so we go back another 20 years, we've had an increase in students of 96%. But guess what? We've had a 252% increase in the number of teachers. So classroom sizes have gotten a lot smaller, but they're still complaining they're too big. And we've had a 702% increase in administrators. Isn't that great? Yeah. So very successful, getting more people, more voting block, right? It's a much larger voting block than it's ever been. In fact, we saw from these elections that the teachers union can get people elected because they are the largest employer. The school districts are often the largest employer in these small areas. And if they get their people out to vote and a lot of us sit home, they win the elections. Oftentimes those school board seats are taken by retirees of the system, not likely to make any changes to the system. It worked well for them. Okay, how do we know education is failing academically? We know that because about 2000, we started the Program for International Student Assessment. It's a standardized test taken across the globe. There's 72 countries currently participating in that, or education systems participating in that. If you look at this in reading, in 2000, the United States was 7th. We were 18th in math and 14th in science out of 65 educational systems. Not too bad. Although we spend more money than any of the other education systems. We definitely throw money at this education, right? But then you look at 2015, we dropped down. Every year we were dropping down. We were 23rd in 2015 in reading, 39th in mathematics, and then we were 24th in science. All of a sudden in 2018, maybe it's because we're paying attention now, it looks like we're doing a little bit better. But I still want you to know that here is the average. United States is the red dots, and the other line is the average of all the other education systems. We in the United States are just average with the average of all these other education systems, many of them still developing. And in some cases in mathematics, we're lower than the average of the others. So I don't care where they rank us, we still are doing a poor job at educating our students. Poor. Did you know that in Ohio, and again, these numbers are disappearing from the Ohio Department of Education. They're disappearing because I'm making it public, and I get my information often from the Ohio Department of Education. But in just a couple years ago, 41% of our students that graduated in Ohio, got a diploma, 41% did not meet the minimum competencies to get into college. That's approaching half of our students don't get into college without taking remedial courses to get there. And many colleges have lowered their minimum standards to let students in. Did you know today that the only thing a student needs to graduate is to attend? They can fail every single high school course and still get a diploma. That's the state of education. Who's doing that? Who's making those decisions? Wouldn't it be crazy? Okay, here, the blue line at the top shows spending over time since 1970 at the bottom. Across the bottom is reading, math, and science scores during those times. I told you, we spend more money. We've been flooding the system with people and money, and it's getting us nowhere. In fact, they're getting lower in many cases. This is a little bit older age group of students. This is on the SATs. So this would be 15, 16, maybe even 17-year-olds. You see the yellow line again, yellow-green is spending. And the bottom lines are the SAT scores. We've been doing our job. We've been giving them our liberty more and more and more. The Columbus area, they passed all their levies. I don't understand it because probably people don't know this. We've been giving it money. It's still broken. Okay, here is Ohio. These are the proficient scores. So when a child is called proficient, what do you all think that means? You would think that that means they're doing okay. That's the kind of definition I get from most people. They're getting it. They're coming along. You know, there's some comprehension of the materials. But here's what's happening. In third grade, to be proficient, you only have to answer 57%, 57 to 69% of the questions correctly. Now, if your student came home and they had a 57% on their paper, would you call that proficient? No one would. Okay, what about fourth grade English? That's what we're looking at. Fourth grade English, 47% correct, and you're called proficient. Again, these children are failing these exams, and they're called proficient, and they're given to the next grade. You can look through this whole chart, but in reading, for example, I go down a little bit. Advanced means you got a 79 to 100. Maybe that's acceptable. Would you call it accelerated if your student got 66 to 78%? But that's the kind of report that a parent gets. We would get these reports with these beautiful big bars. We think, oh, you know, Johnny's really doing fine. He's proficient. He's doing fine. Nobody gives you the percentile scores. And Ohio is keep lowering these because I showed up here that in 2021, they lowered that third grade English score to 49%. So what they're doing, guys, to fool us is they keep lowering the cut scores so that more and more of your students are proficient, which makes the school district look better. It's a fraud. I'm sorry, it's fraudulent. And what has to happen is people have to start saying, this doesn't work. It's not working for our children. It's not working for their parents, our community, and this state, and this nation. This is horrible. that were accepting failures. This is what was happening, and now they do an A through F system, but again, they're lowering the cut scores so that more schools get A's and more schools get B's. If they lower the cut scores, more of their students are bunched into the proficient category. But back in 2000, I think that says 83 districts were excellent or excellent with distinction. Remember when they used that wording, excellent and excellent with distinction? But by the year 2011, 352 districts were excellent with distinction. Do you think that the students were performing better on the tests? No, they were lowering those cut scores so that more and more districts could celebrate their success. When I was going through training on the school board association, so as soon as a school board member is sworn in, they're whisked away to a weekend with OSBA, Ohio School Boards Association. Ohio School Boards Association tells school board members how to be good school board members. Don't walk through your district, it makes people nervous. You need to present a united front. Your job is to be a cheerleader for your district. You can disagree behind closed doors, but once the vote is taken, you have to support it. What kind of world is that? If you didn't support it before they took the vote and they outvoted you, you still don't support it afterwards, and you can certainly say so. That you're supposed to, when the when a community member contacts you or a parent contacts you, you're supposed to flip that correspondence to the superintendent and treasurer, meaning don't talk to your constituents. So I left that weekend, guys, knowing I was not going to be a good school board member. I am not going to do what they're telling me to do. And it was a tough 4 years because I said, that's nonsense. And the board president would write to me and say, you're supposed to blah, blah, blah. I say, well, no, I swore an oath, and that oath supported the US Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Ohio. I didn't renege on that because I swore an oath. In fact, I just solidified it. So you speak for yourself, board president, and I will speak for myself as a elected board person. I found out though, and the reason I left running for school board is that school board members need better training. They need to start looking at these numbers and saying, this isn't good enough for our students. We need to make a change. And that change would be to raise the bar. We don't care that Ohio's bar is so low. Our school district and our students deserve better. I don't think that's too much to ask. We need minimum competencies to progress to the next grade, right? I think that's reasonable. We need a better system that manages money better. This is just a percent of students ready for college level work. And you see here that only 35% of our students are ready for college in the science category. I mean, this is all really sad. They can't go on to college without taking remedial courses. This is just another example. Accountability, I'm not going to take the time to go through this because I'll take too much time, but some of it is changing the graduation requirements, which I just mentioned. They only have to attend. They don't have to pass anything. Tenure still exists. By the way, in Springboro, we stopped giving tenure. You can do it. I said, I was a college professor at Miami University, and I said, I understand what tenure means, and I don't understand how it helps children learn. When you can explain to me that tenure helps children learn, I'll be all over it. Nobody could explain that tenure helped children learn. In fact, I believe it does the opposite. So we didn't grant any continuing contracts for the whole other 3 years I was there. I said, I don't support it, okay? All right, well, we're gonna get to close to the end here. What has been done to fix this? In 1980, there was a federal program they put in, and I think it was outcomes-based, it could have been evidence, but outcome-based education. In 1990, it was evidence-based education. In 2000, it was Goals 2000. In 2001, it was No Child Left Behind. And then you all know that in 2010, it was Common Core. Who has been responsible for backing all this stuff? Well, the Federal Department of Education. Who is in control of the Federal Department of Education? The largest voting bloc with the most money in the world. That'd be the teachers union. Okay, and what they did in Common Core was they add the social emotional learning. 30% of what Common Core was about, or still is all about, is social emotional learning. Does it make sense to trade intellectual think with emotional think? Does that make sense if you're trying to increase the academic success of a student? Absolutely not. It's the opposite. You teach a child to think emotionally, though, and you can teach them that it's really sad that polar bears might have less ice, but it's okay to murder an unborn child. You can teach them a lot of things if you teach them to think emotionally. If you teach them to think intellectually, they might argue with you. Well, we don't want kids arguing with us. Okay. This again is showing the same thing. The fix. What I think we should keep doing is expose the failures. Expose them. Because the only way that I saw in Springboro that the problems got fixed was if I said it out loud in a board meeting. So I said, is anybody else concerned that 23% of our students do not meet the minimum competencies to get into college? See, Springboro was doing pretty good, right? Compared to others. I said, if even one of our students doesn't meet the minimum competencies to get into college, we have a problem. Shouldn't that be our graduation requirement? That you meet the minimum? Yes, because that's step 2 of, and we should prepare them for that. So that's some of the stuff we did. Demand higher minimum competencies. I mentioned that. Parents should teach the socio-emotional stuff, and the school district should teach math, reading, science, right? That's why we send them there. Okay, saving children from the failing education system involves you. I formed this new organization where I will train school board members to do a lot of what we did in Springboro. It's called the National School Board Leadership Council. So any new school board members that wants to learn how to do their job correctly, please send them to my organization, nsblc.com. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Anybody, we got time for a quick question right here, maybe 2.
Quick question, Ken Bowman. Betsy DeVos, how would you give her an A, B, C, D, or F when she was Department of Education leader?
She had an enormous job to do there. I do appreciate a lot of what she did. What she understood was that if we have choice, children will get a better education simply because now they have to compete for that child. Right now, they don't. They have got a monopoly on education. And even though you might send your child to another school, it's not fair for parents to have to pay for education twice for their one child. That's not fair.
Another question.
Well, I forgot to tell you 2 successes in yesterday's election. And one was Jamie Jeffers out at Bethel Tate. She's the mom of 6.
Mhm.
Out in Lynchburg Clay, Susan Blankenship won, a good conservative lady. She's the mother of 14.
Wow.
Excellent.
Another thing I wanted to mention is that I work closely with Moms for America. They have formed a Moms Force. And in Moms Force, they educate lots of moms and dads, but they educate mostly moms, and they call them cottage meetings. While they have the cottage meetings, they're teaching these women all about the Constitution, things they don't already know. Then they ask them, if you want to run for school board, we're going to put you over here in Moms Force. Then they also then shuffle anybody that gets elected to my organization. So we're working hand in hand to try to get more people to run and more people successful. What we're going to make the case for is that there's no reason for these school boards to pay your tax dollars to an organization that lobbies against us. That's the NSBA and that's the OSBA. They lobby against parental rights. We know that. They're simply in cahoots with you know who. And my organization says, stop spending that money there, put it in the classroom. Membership to my organization will be out of the board members' pockets, or we'll find business sponsors for them. We will not use district money for their membership.
Kelly, you mentioned that the Ohio Department of Education is making things disappear off their website. Well, we're starting to make a lot of them disappear, which is a good thing.
Yes,
So thank you so
definitely.
much to Kelly
You're welcome.
Kohls. Let's thank her. Appreciate it, Kelly. We had another speaker come here 2 years ago, Kim Grant from the King School District, and she told almost an identical story about the abuse and community pressure it was to be a school board member. So Darby, we're all pushing for you. We'll be your support network should you need it. I had a chance to meet John Jakubowski up in Bucyrus this summer. He's the author of an award-winning book that has gained national attention, Bellwether Blues, A Conservative Awakening of the Millennial Soul. And gosh, it's been featured on so many shows, Rush Limbaugh Show, Newsmax, Washington Times, Newsweek, the New York Times, BBC, The Federalist, and dozens of leading media outlets. He's the director of Smart Solve, an award-winning startup business focusing on sustainable packaging. And you can check out his monthly blog on Newsmax titled The Red Pill. John, his wife Missy, and their 4 children reside in Northwest Ohio, and we're really glad to have John here tonight. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Good evening. I wanted to thank Kelly for that very inspiring presentation and informative presentation. Information that I think we all need to know and learn. And Darby, congratulations on your victory. That's fantastic. The only regret I have is that I didn't make a PowerPoint presentation. Unfortunately, I'll explain a little bit why I didn't have time, because usually you see my beautiful family. I have 4 kids, as Dan mentioned, 11, 9, 6, and 3, Amelia, Judah, Samuel, and Levi, and then my wife, Missy. We've been married 13 years. And as I say, when I come by myself, it means you're missing not the better half, you're missing like the better 99%. So you got 1% of the whole in that one. I apologize for that. But the reason is because my grandmother has fallen ill and has been sent to hospice. So our family's in a position right now where we're navigating some logistics, in addition to my little 3-year-old niece with cancer. Sorry, extra noise there. And there's just a lot going on in my family. And as I have thought through those situations of life and death, and thinking about my grandmother, Uma, who literally is an angel on earth, it's made me reflect upon things like eternity, the things that really matter. And I think about Uma's life. We call her Uma. Her name's Helen Jakubowski, and how inspirational she was. There's a poem by, I'm getting some feedback here. Is that me? Should I move this over? As long as you're good, I'll keep going. Okay. Okay, sounds good. So Helen Jakubowski reminded me of this poem. I believe it's by Robert Frost, and it says, "All that we see or seem is but a dream in a dream." And I think about my life and the life of all of my fellow, her grandchildren, my cousins, and then her sons and daughters, and the impacts that they have made throughout this earth. And I think about our lives really are a reflection of the dream that she had. And I don't think there's anything more powerful than a praying mom and grandma. In fact, I think the book of Proverbs says this, that the prayers of a mother and grandmother reach to the 4th generation. And I think about the prayers that Uma made, and we actually had a copy of her Bible now that she's in a coma, and we were looking through the Bible, and there were the names of all of the grandchildren and all of her sons and daughters listed, along with specific scripture passages that she was praying over their life. So in reality, I must recognize that any of the successes that I have in life, they're not attributable to me. I think in many ways they're attributable to those that have prayed for me, especially my grandmother. So that's a tribute to her, and something I want to encourage all of you about. When it feels like we least have an impact on this earth, let's forget that there's one place that we can appeal to, and that is to heaven. And heaven hears us. In fact, that flag, I wasn't going to go here tonight, but I'm sorry, I got a little extra time, so you might have to ride this roller coaster with me. In 1776, there was discussions around what flag we were going to use. And Benjamin Franklin had recommended this evergreen tree because of the Iroquois Indians, who, when they entered an alliance with a new indigenous tribe, that indigenous alliance would have an evergreen symbol to it because it meant forever, never to be broken. Well, George Washington, in the midst of battle, knew we were facing the greatest military force on earth. Yeah. Yep. Check. You hear me? All right. We also had George Washington, who in the midst of a battle with the greatest military force on earth, that being the British, was in a position where he thought we were going to lose unless we had divine intervention. So a flag was created that flew on all of the colonial ships in the Revolutionary War, and that flag's called an appeal to heaven. And there's a picture of an evergreen tree on that flag. So I think about that, and that it came from a statement of one of the philosophers of old named John Locke, who you may have studied in your many seminars here at Empower You. And John Locke said that if all of your frustrations in appealing to men and you are unable to achieve what the desired outcome might be, you still have an appeal to heaven. And I want to remind that to all of you tonight, all of you listening online and the folks in the room, is that even if we feel as if we've lost the battle, never forget that there's always one place that you can go, and that's on your knees in your prayer closet. And I believe that my grandmother, who is nearing eternity, is an example of a woman who made an impact in this nation, never to be seen on the news or, broadly speaking, fame. Her name might not be out there everywhere, but in heaven, that's where the impact, I think, truly will be made. Thank you. That leads me to a lighter topic, and that's my youngest son, Levi. We were thinking about coming here. My wife and kids were going to try to join me, but for the reasons I mentioned, they're not here. Now, I don't know if my 3-year-old would have sat very well through my presentation. He hears enough of Daddy at home. He doesn't need to listen to me at a long, boring seminar. I hope to keep it lively for you, but for him, it would be difficult. But as I was leaving today, he asked me a very curious question, and it made me almost double over. He asked, "Daddy, where are my hookers?" I said, "What?" He said, "Daddy, where are my hookers?" I said, "Levi, what are you talking about?" So I go to my wife, Missy, and she explained to me that they were on the floor playing with popcorn, and it was him and it was my nephew, Merritt. And Merritt is raised in a home where they basically have a farm and a lot of equipment, a lot of agricultural equipment. And his daddy's lawnmower is usually hooked up to a trailer. So instead of calling the trailer, he calls it his hooker. So he comes in explaining to Levi that he has a toy with his dump truck and he wants a hooker. So Levi's coming to me asking where his hookers are. And I'm asking a 3-year-old talking about hookers. My, oh my, what is the state of affairs in the Jakubowski household? I can tell you this, my little Levi and the rest of my kids are the reason I do what I do. And part of it is to make sure that they avoid the pathway of real life hookers. And hopefully that vocabulary eventually changes. Maybe some of the work Kelly's doing can work on vocabulary and English training there. I had to tell you that story because it cracked me up. There's kids say the darndest things, and I could go on and on all night about the stories of my children, all 4 of them, precious and wonderful. And the reason why my wife and I do what we do and sacrifice the way that we sacrifice. I've spoken in many places throughout the state, and whether it's an audience, I was telling this to Betty, whether it's an audience of 2 or 2,000, it doesn't matter. I believe that when you accept an assignment to make a presentation, you give your all. You give your very best. I'm a motivational speaker for the Bowling Green Falcons. I played football there from 2002 to 2007, and that audience and environment is a little bit different than the one that I'm in tonight. So I've learned to try to adjust and attune the presentation, the style, and the way that it's delivered, but nonetheless, the same passion ought to be delivered because you deserve it. You made a sacrifice of time tonight to be here, and you decided that you were going to be a part of Empower You, and you're going to listen to these speakers. So I believe that you deserve the best that I have to offer. And I want to thank Dan and thank Betty and for the leadership here of inviting me to this inspiring opportunity to present to all of you. The presentation I have tonight comes from my book. The book is Bellwether Blues, A Conservative Awakening of the Millennial Soul. Millennials. Now that word is almost like a curse word to us conservatives, right? It's the snowflake generation, also known as the me generation. Millennials have grown in, and by the way, the group that least likes millennials and the stereotypes are other millennials that don't fit those stereotypes, me being one of those. But I wanted to understand more about the millennial generation, born between the years of 1981 to 1996. So now you're talking about 25 to 40-year-olds, different from what most people think. They think millennials are younger. That's Generation Z. Generation Z, roughly 12 to 25 now, are the kids that are being schooled. It's a different generation, and there's a lot of nuance there. But millennials, by and large, have lived a life that has been, for the most part, full of left-of-center perspectives, left-of-center indoctrination. You saw Kelly's presentation a little earlier. It goes way back, but that level of worldview and framing of worldview is placed inside of our minds from a very young age if you're in the public school system. I think it's gotten worse recently, and I think it's become even more aggressive. But nevertheless, if you talk to somebody that's grown up in in society, has gone to a public school, they more than likely have a left-of-center worldview. Now, what's interesting about that is when you're raised in that environment, the only thing that you know, all your 5 senses, are going to come from that worldview. And if you talk to liberals, they can't quite understand at this age group how it's even possible that you could have a worldview that is contrary to that unless you hate the way that they live. All right, this is really important because we're going to talk about that awakening of the millennial soul. Understand that they've come into it with a worldview. The worldview has almost built a level of indoctrination. And the question is how can you awaken them out of that? And one of the things that you have to do is change their understanding of who is on the other side. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But before I get deep into that, I want to talk a little bit about the environment in which we find ourselves. I think we're in a target-rich environment for Americans of all shapes, sizes, and ages. Think about the disasters that have occurred. We can go down to immigration. Never have we had so many border crossings. The amount of not only illegal immigrants crossing the border, but drugs crossing the border, the increase of fentanyl, and the disaster and the crisis that it has caused is creating pain in all of America. All Americans know this, from the top of the nation in Minnesota all the way down to the very bottom where they feel it most at the border. They're sensing that a nation with no borders is no nation at all. And there's absolutely an agenda behind this, but it's wreaking havoc on our systems. And the one thing I would say, I wrote an article about this several months ago. I've lived in Guatemala. You'll hear a little bit about that in a little while, but I will say this: open borders destroy families. See, most of the immigrants that come from Central America, from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, are the Northern Triangle. That's one of the primary sending locations for immigrants. These nations, it's usually the father figure, or the father, the male, that leaves home and emigrates into the United States. Now, there are occasions where kids go, and the tragedy of them sending 12, 13, 14-year-olds on that trafficking journey full of peril. I've seen statistics that say any girl that is traveling on that immigrant's path has an 80% chance of being sexually abused or raped. 80% chance. Now, most of the fathers that are leaving these homes, back to my original point, as they're leaving, guess who stays behind? The mother and the children. So now you're talking about fatherless homes. That is a destroyed family. We know the results of fatherless homes. So from my vantage point, a strong border in America is not just about the policy benefits that we have here, and there's a lot of reasons why we could get into a defense of having strong borders, but it's also compassionate for the families that are down there. And there's a lot we can talk about when you get into broader immigration reform. But I make that point to say that's one thing that you could see in every campaign across the country. There's another issue that we've talked about or seen very prominently, and that's inflation. I run a business, and in this business, I'm telling you, we're experiencing a supply chain crisis. We have raw materials that we can't get into port. We've had to freeze hiring. We're trying to look at what we can do to navigate the ability in a fast-growing business to acquire these assets to continue to supply our customers. But our customers are saying, and it's a business-to-business market, they're saying they have the same issue of getting other supplies to be able to fulfill the product and the technology. I think what we're in right now is not just a situation of temporary inflation. I think we're going to see a long-term, unfortunately, very long-term effect on this. We're taking every precaution necessary as a business to try to work through what the risk calculus is to ensure that we have supply chain continuity. And that is, I think, once again, something that is disastrous, that is affecting the wallets and pocketbooks of Americans all across the country. Another issue we could talk about is Afghanistan and the disastrous debacle of pulling our troops out and the hundreds of citizens left behind in spite of the lies the government told us, and this administration, the Biden administration, telling us that there were no Americans, that they got them all out, and come to find out, well, that's not true. There's hundreds of Americans that remain in Afghanistan. We could talk about everything that followed that in the peril. We could also talk about abortion and the radical agenda of the left to make abortion something that is funded by the US government to the tune of billions of dollars, advocating for it across this world, taking unborn babies and destroying their lives and not giving care about it. We could talk a lot about these policies, but what's most interesting, and this is relevant for the topic tonight, is what was the issue that drove Virginian voters en masse to support Glenn Youngkin? Education. It was education. And we just talked a little bit about education earlier. Why was it education? Well, Virginia is an interesting state for us to study. If you look at Virginia, a lot of millennials, Northern Virginia and throughout the states, they're now raising their children. They're now in situations where they're trying to figure out what the future looks like. Their kids have entered into the K-12 system, and that has now become a central focus for their life. As I say this, in my life, the thing that changed me the most was accepting Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And second to that, people would think it would be marriage. Now, I got the benefit of marriage. My wife, on the other hand, maybe that was transformative for her because now she's much more serving than I am. I'm much more selfish. God has helped grow me in many ways. But it was really having kids. When we had our first daughter, now 11 years ago, that changed me in a way I can't explain. The moment that eternal being was now brought to earth is the moment I recognized that I had a level of responsibility, a duty that I didn't have before. So that thing is the second thing that most changed me. Well, a lot of parents, that might be the thing that most has shaped and changed their perspective in all of their lives. So now it becomes a part of their soul. In fact, I could get theological on you tonight and talk about a scripture passage that motivates me, one of my core values. What profits it a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? I believe the soul is not just my own personal ministry. I believe the soul is my family, my wife and my kids, and how I treat them and engage them and lead them and guide them and be a part of serving that. As Christ served the church, so I must serve my wife and my family. Well, that element of millennials is now their soul. And that's why when you see schools forcing mandates, when you see schools telling kids that they are classified on the basis of immutable characteristics, such as their skin color or their gender. Now they're talking about sexuality, bringing intrusive and invasive concepts that are foreign to 6-year-olds into their minds. It starts to get awakened, if you would, the mama bear and the papa bear. And these parents start to see there's something about this situation that doesn't fit right. I've grown my entire life inside of the system, and I've voted my entire life for the right people on the left side of the aisle, for the Democrats, the compassionate people. But now what my kids are being taught is different from what I know is necessary for them to thrive and to succeed. And then when the Democratic candidate comes out and tells me that I don't deserve a voice in my children's education, oh, you've crossed the line now. So the Youngkin campaign, on the heels of that debate, that's just what they messaged 100%. Wisely so. They saw the polling, they saw the numbers, they saw the movement, they saw what happened, tragically happened in Loudoun County. Who here does not know what happened in Loudoun County? Anybody? Everybody aware of the Loudoun County situation where they took a bathroom, they allowed a trans got in, a individual with a dress, raped a young girl, molested a girl, and then they hid it and they didn't let any prosecution happen. And then they sent the kid to another school and the same thing happened. Guess what happened? That awakened the mama and papa bears throughout this district, and it changed the nature of that election. There's something important that we can learn from that lesson. And you heard, I think Dan talked earlier about the backpack bill. We have a tremendous opportunity. I think it's the greatest opportunity of our generation, and that is to empower students to have educational freedom. I was just on a political call talking about the terminology to be used. And they say that school choice, because not that school choice is obviously critical, we agree with it, but because the left, the unions especially, been so successful at using that terminology and twisting it, it doesn't have as favorable as a rating in urban settings. They said the words to use that really awaken the masses is educational freedom. Use educational freedom and you change the shape of the way people receive that terminology. The second thing they say is you always, usually in any political campaign, are going to need an enemy. The enemy aren't the teachers. Don't point out the teachers. We all have had great teachers. Even in the system that exists today, there are tremendous teachers that make a tremendous impact on our lives. They say the best enemy is the union boss. You put a union boss there, a Randy Wintergarten, and you are going to win all day long. It's politicians, it's bureaucrats, and it's union leaders. Those are the three folks you want to focus on in your messaging. And when you do, it's going to awaken that mama and papa bear up the way we saw in Virginia. Every state and every conservative and every Republican ought to be watching with tremendous interest what has happened in the state of Virginia, because it's changed the calculus for how we persuade the soul. I think this presentation is so timely because what I write about in Bellwether Blues is precisely that. What I write about is that we can't reach them through intellectual arguments. In fact, there are 3 principles I'm going to talk about for the way that we will reach millennials. Before I get there, though, let me talk about the way that I did it. When I was named as county chairman of the Wood County Republican Party in 2017, I had no idea what I was doing. I was a graduate student at Georgetown, kind of figuring my way through life and through worldview, and I was challenged by my colleagues who were all left of center in 2008, 2010, right when Obama was rising to power, and I found them to be very persuasive. I thought they were tremendously persuasive, and I didn't know what I was. I didn't know if I was a Republican, a Democrat, or something in between. So that's what I decided. I'll be something in between because I just don't quite trust the government fully, but I was raised in this conservative home, and I don't know, they're making persuasive arguments. So long story short, I take 5 years when we moved back with our daughter. We wanted to raise our family back home where we were from in Northwest Ohio. And the process of traveling the world and seeing places like Nairobi, Kenya, and seeing places like Bangalore, India, and Mumbai, India, and Jakarta, Indonesia, and Thailand. I'm trying to remember Chiang Mai, Thailand, and obviously Guatemala City, Guatemala. Those places immediately changed my perspective of appreciation for what we have here in America. And the simple question that I asked myself is, why do we have it the way that we have it? Because what I've seen in these places is endemic corruption, trafficking that is sanctioned by the governments that live inside of these regions, poverty like I had never seen before, some of the worst poverty imaginable. All of these factors existed because of bad government. So what made America so unique and so exceptional?
And that was what began my 5-year study of the founding of America. It's what led me to memorize the Constitution. It's what led me to understand the documents of the framing of the founding fathers and what they wrote about this nation, why they thought we could do what we did. And it's why I began to love America. Yes, we have our flaws, absolutely. And we should teach history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, absolutely. Slavery is a stain that has caused us tremendous pain, unbelievable, unspeakable pain. And there's a price that we had to pay for that and are continue to pay that today. But there's something about America relative to the nations of the earth that makes us a unique and an exceptional place. So what were the secrets that unlocked America's greatness? And that's what led me on the journey to the party of Lincoln. And that's what led me to become involved in the local party, which led me to become chairman of the Wood County Republican Party. So I'm in this new role. I'm green as all get out. I don't know what I'm doing. And I receive a call from, I think it was New York University, doing research on swing counties. And I had no idea about this, but apparently Wood County was one of the very few, the handful of swing counties that existed across the nation. In fact, of the 3,142 counties in America, Wood County was one of 58. Very unique. And how do they measure swing county? Well, they measure it by those counties having voted twice for Bush, 2000, 2004, Obama, 08 and 12, and then Trump in 16. This is, again, 2018 when we're talking. So they asked me what it was about Wood County that made us so unique. And I said, I don't really know yet. I got to learn more about my own county to understand what it was that's causing us to flip back and forth in elections. Now, it's really interesting, by the way. In 2016, Trump won the state of Ohio by roughly 7.9 points, if I'm not mistaken, 7.8 points. He won Wood County by the exact same margin. DeWine won the state of Ohio by 4.2 points. Guess what he won Wood County by? 4.2 points. Trump wins the state of Ohio in 2020 by 8 points. He wins Wood County by 7.9 points. I would say pretty close to a bellwether. And that's the term where the book is originated, bellwether blues. A bellwether, by the way, for those who ask, it's the leading sheep of a flock, a domesticated flock of sheep. They would put a bell on the wether's neck, the wether being the lead sheep. And where that sheep would go, the rest of the flock would follow. All right, so that's how the title came into play. And I wanted to know specifically about my generation, because of the 3 counties in Ohio that were named swing counties. They're all up in northwestern Ohio: Wood, Sandusky, and Ottawa County. Of those 3 counties, I wanted to understand what makes Wood County so different. And what I found out is, of those 3, Wood County is the youngest. So immediately it told me that there's a lot of millennials. It's also the largest of the 3. So there's a lot of millennials that we can look at. So I went into the empirical evidence to try and understand what was happening nationwide with this generation of millennials. And what I found out is that many millennials have left the left. They are so frustrated, skeptical, and disillusioned with how far the left has gone. All these issues that I just told you about have caused them a level of distrust. Now, they haven't left the basic ideals of what they've learned, but they've left the radical left, and they find themselves in this no man's land. They're not willing to embrace the right because that's anathema to them. Conservatism is to them synonymous with something that is evil and wrong. But they're in this messy middle, and they're in this situation where, as I put it, they've caught the blues. Thus the term bellwether blues. So the question is how can we alleviate them of this situation of the blues, as I'm speaking to conservative readers? And that's what leads me into Wood County, where I study the stories of 7 millennials, all 7 having previously supported Democratic candidates or voted for Democratic candidates, even if they weren't old enough to vote, and then changing their votes in the 2016 election to Donald J. Trump. And I want to understand why. What led them to have that radical of a change? In the 7 stories, you'll see not all of them really love Trump. Some of them really don't like him that much. Some of them love him, just different flavors of different voices. But there were certain things that awakened them within their stories that changed their perception. And that leads me to the conclusion of the book, which I'm going to talk about tonight, specifically in chapter 10. The 3 things that I learned through the process of studying How You Persuade Millennials are: number 1, persuade rather than debate. Number 2, simplify rather than complicate. And number 3, unify rather than divide. I mentioned earlier that the major challenge of millennials was, first of all, understanding the perspective of a different worldview. They probably have no idea, if they've grown up in a scenario like the one I mentioned, having not had any experience with another conservative, to think that you might actually have a logical argument of compassion that defends your position. They know you have an argument for lower taxes. They know you have an argument likely for some level of smaller government, but they think it's because you're selfish and because you lack compassion for the poor. So one of the things that you have to do when you have conversations with them is you don't meet them with frustration and with anger and with vitriol. Think about that. In your life, of all the people that reach out to you with anger, frustration, and vitriol, how many of you have fabulous, flourishing relationships with them? I would say not many of us. I try to stay away from those people, and I know a lot of them. Believe me, the more you get out in the circuit, the more you meet some people that really hate your guts. However, who do you spend the most time with if they're loving, compassionate, and listening? Those are the people that usually become influencers in your life. So that rule of listening becomes absolutely essential. In fact, one of the challenges I place in Bellwether Blues is to find a millennial, invite them out to coffee, and do everything within your power to spend 80% of that conversation listening. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Spend even more time listening than speaking. Have really great questions. Invoke a conversation. Show interest in them, genuine interest that will allow them to know that you care more about them than their simple political belief or your desire to win them over. You might just find a lasting relationship that could potentially change your life as much as it changes theirs. But think about that. Who is most influential in your life? Be that person to them. We got to stop thinking in mass abundance. Now, there's absolutely a role for that, absolute role for campaign strategies, a role for social media campaigning. But as an individual, I don't believe those that are of the faith, we're not called to change the masses. We're called to change those that surround us in our neighborhoods. The idea of subsidiarity, taking advantage of my local engagement and the people that God has placed me with. If I am unfaithful to them, then I've been unfaithful to my most important assignment. I believe that's our responsibility, is to reach those that surround us. One thing that I would say is there was a study that was done that talked about over the period of 20 years, I think it was from 1983 to 2003 or something like that, where they studied 3,000 individuals. It was in the UK, and it was a study of happiness. And they wanted to understand what caused people to be happy. And what they found was this, is when you place an individual that is happy into their life, and they don't define happy tremendously well, at least according to my standards, but I think we generally get the tenets of it, but they place the individual that's happy in somebody's life, their happiness index increased by 9%. Be the 9%. Be the 9% person. Step into somebody's life and improve their life by 9%. And I would argue that you will at least have 9% more influence in their voting habits and in the way they view the world than you did before you were that 9% person. Be the 9%. Persuade rather than debate. The second point is simplify rather than complicate. This might be my favorite point that I flesh out quite a bit in the book and in Bellwether Blues. So one of the things that we have to do is it's really hard to make arguments that get deep into the weeds of why reduced taxation or limited government or what is conservatism, why it's bad. These things are complicated arguments that you hear people that come in and speak to you for 30 to 60 minutes that are experts, and they're fleshing out details to help us understand it. You don't have that much time. You have a limited amount of time to make an impact, to answer a question. Now, hopefully you earn more time through building that relationship of trust. But nevertheless, if you present to them a complex argument that doesn't make logical sense within the framework of their worldview, your argument's going to fall flat. So one thing you have to know and understand is, what's the definition of conservatism? Well, I allow Larry Arnn to make this definition. I'm going to read it to you tonight from page 157. According to Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale, conservatism is the additional knowledge that things that have had a good reputation for a long time are more trustworthy than new things. This is especially true of original things. The very term principle refers to something that comes first. To change the principle of a thing is to change it into something else. Without the principle, the thing is lost. If American conservatism means anything, then it means the things found at the beginning of America, when it became a nation. Now, that's a lot of words, but he's saying that if we want to define conservatism, we have to go back to the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution is the frame. The Declaration is the golden apple, according to Abraham Lincoln. During the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, if you have a chance to listen to those, I strongly encourage it. You can find those, I think, on Audible or audiobooks that are out there. During the Lincoln-Douglas debates, the big argument is, what is the true nature of the founding? Lincoln came in with an understanding, a comprehensive understanding of the founding, and made the argument that the Declaration of Independence is for all human beings, that those rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were for all people. But he understood how that was contextualized and delivered that argument in a powerful and a persuasive way that ultimately led him to the success. Even though he lost the 1858 election, it led him to the success of the presidential campaign of 1860. Douglas, he had those thin skim level talking points without deep facts surrounding the framers and the founders, and made statements that were misstatements and misunderstanding the founding. That, I think, was the foundation of understanding conservatism and the foundation of the Republican Party. So we have to understand that. But even what I just said is pretty complex, right? Who's going to go back and memorize this definition? I don't know that I can. So what I wanted to do in this book and for myself was to simplify it. Now, one of the things they teach you in public speaking is if you're going to be effective and you want something to be retained, it goes by the power of three. All right, find things that are the power of three, and it makes it easily memorizable and something that you can easily recollect. So the power of three that I found were faith, family, and freedom. Now, family is synonymous with virtue. And the reason I say that is the golden triangle of freedom, which is something that you can read about if you go back to Os Guinness and many of the other stories of the founders. They talk about these three things all the time. And they argue that our nation cannot exist unless we have these three, as I call them, reservoirs. They call them pillars. But these three important ingredients are existential to the success of the American experiment. John Adams once said that this Constitution is made for a holy, moral, and religious people, without the likes of which it shall not stand. It cannot stand. We must have the ingredients of faith, family, and freedom if the American Constitution and this experiment is to continue on. So when I was in Guatemala living there as an 18-year-old, we would have these situations where there would be limited water storage. And we had these reservoirs that were above our roof. We had 3 reservoirs, in fact, these reservoirs that were above the roof. And that water would allow us to clean our clothes, would allow us to bathe, would allow us to drink. It fed into our drinking water. So there would be times when for supply chain crises, not too different from what we're facing today in America, but they would not have readily available clean water that they could bring out to the home in which we were living. I hated those weeks, oh my word, because no longer could we shower and bathe. We would have, I think once a week, you did not want to be around us. We could shower or bathe once a week in cold water for a 5-minute shower. So you had to go really fast. No longer could we wash our clothes. We had to limit our water usage in order to have it for the most essential elements of living, which is just drinking clean water and cooking food. So those weeks were really challenging, but what would happen is we would see the limitation immediately because those reservoirs that were filled with water, the moment in which we could not fill the reservoirs up, one reservoir would be depleted and you would move into the second reservoir and then the third reservoir. Well, guess what happened? The first reservoir would take a little bit of time to trickle down because you could still use some of the water from the second reservoir for laundry and the third reservoir maybe for showers, and you have the first reservoir for drinking water. Well, once you depleted the first reservoir, now you had to put the drinking water and the bathing and the laundry into only 2 reservoirs. And then when that second reservoir was depleted, you only had 1 reservoir for all of the functions that we were talking about. In Bellwether Blues, I make the argument that faith, family, and freedom are like reservoirs. If one of those reservoirs is being depleted, it's going to have an existential extra pull on the second reservoir. And if that's depleted, it's going to have a pull on the third reservoir to the point where they are all depleted and we are morally bankrupt, and we as a constitutional republic cannot continue. Now, why do I say that? Well, let's talk about those 3 ingredients of faith, family, and freedom. So first of all is faith. Faith is something that is integral to who we are. In fact, at the founding era, there was a man that was more powerful and more famous than George Washington. If you look at the 1770s below, the most famous American was not George Washington. His name was George Whitfield. George Whitfield preached sermons all across America. He had 9 missionary journeys. He was a British man that came 9 missionary journeys all the way from Boston down to Savannah. And as he traveled back and forth on horseback, he preached 17,000 sermons. An estimated 80% of Americans, of the 4 million Americans alive in that era, heard him speak live. And when he would preach, George Whitfield wouldn't just come with a message of going to church and sitting down in your pews and paying your tithes. His message was revolutionary. In this message, he made a claim that was so bold in that day that it shook the pulpits of America. What he said is he was in these fields and literally thousands of people would come out. One of his best friends was Benjamin Franklin, by the way, and Benjamin Franklin invested thousands of dollars into the orphanage that he started in Savannah, Georgia. So Benjamin Franklin went out one day because he saw the phenomenon of George Whitfield and what was happening. And he said, man, how many people can hear this guy speak live? I'm using a microphone and there's, just a few of us in here. He didn't have a microphone. He had no electric system. Franklin estimated that 40,000 people could hear him as clearly as you can hear me. It's a miracle. His voice would boom and it was melodious. Now, he was very ugly, as they say. He did not look good on the eyes, but his melodious voice made up for the bad looks. And as he would preach, the thousands of people would come in, and they said they knew that the Great Awakening had hit America. The first Great Awakening had hit America when the coal miners were coming out of the coal mines by the thousands to get away from work to hear this 4'11" preacher. And as he would preach, their faces black with soot, the tears falling down their faces would turn their faces white as snow. Faith is fundamental to what America is. If you look at the most influential documents in America's history, Donald Lutz did a study in 1994 at the University of Houston, studying 17,000 sources. And as he looked at the 17,000 plus sources, he said, inarguably, the most influential source of the American founding in all of the writings was the Bible. The second most influential source was a guy named Charles Montesquieu. The Bible was cited 34% of the time, Montesquieu a meagerly 8% of the time. Without question, the Bible was foundational to the American ethic. Now, our nation is not one nation covenanted with God. We're not a theocracy. Our founders wanted freedom of religion. They wanted freedom of conviction. They didn't want to be like a modern day Iran, where if you don't believe the Quran, if you don't confess it, you got to go to prison or you're going to be executed. Not like a modern day North Korea. Oh, I said it's the wrong example. Or a previous Israel out of like with Moses, where you had to believe in the 10 Commandments and follow that. We're not one nation covenanted with God. Neither are we a nation covenanted without God. We're not a modern day North Korea, where if you make a claim of faith, you're going to be sent to a concentration camp, or a modern day China, where you have to hide away from the persecution that exists. America is a nation covenanted under God. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That matters, and matters significantly, because as one nation under God, what we recognize is that even if a person does not confess the name of the God of the Bible, but they follow the natural laws that have been instituted into our nation, they will flourish. So as long as you follow the laws and follow the rules, we can have a functioning society and a pluralistic society like the one that we've had for the last 240 plus years. Well, that leads me to the next ingredient, and that's the ingredient of virtue. Now, I use the word family because I believe family and virtue are very close. I believe it's a part of our soul. You heard me talk about that with education. Family is critical. In a nation today where we have more fatherless homes than ever before in our history, our urban centers, the cities, are plagued with fatherlessness. 70% of homes in urban cities are fatherless. It has a devastating effect, not just on poverty, but also on child delinquency, on a lack of education. It has a devastating impact on an increase of demand of government resources, and it leads to more violence and more problems than we've ever had before. If we fix fatherlessness, I believe we fix this nation. I think it's the plague, and it's the fundamental root that must change. I believe all children have a fundamental right from God to have a loving mother and a loving father. Not all children get that, but I believe that that's a right. And when a father selfishly steps out of the home, or a mother selfishly steps out of the home, they're compromising the right of that child. Family is necessary for the cultivation of virtue, for the cultivation of habits that will change the society that surrounds us. If we have people that abide by the law, if we have children raised in a home where they learn how to live as a good citizen, a contributing citizen, it makes an impact on our nation. Which leads me to the final ingredient, and that's freedom. Freedom. Freedom is something that we as Americans love, we embody. It's a part of our anthems, it's a part of our documents, it's a part of what makes us come alive. I just mentioned the word educational freedom, and there's something about that word that raises the spirit of all of us because we were born Americans. And I don't care if you're on the left or the right, freedom is something that we have been born with as Americans, and we value it and we treasure it. The problem with freedom is we're taught a half-baked version of freedom. Now, mind you, I love my libertarian friends. I'm a big believer in the big tent party, but I think the libertarian friends have embraced only one side of freedom, and that's called negative freedom, or freedom from. And it is imperative that we have laws that protect us from overreaching and tyrannical government, that we ensure that citizens have the freedom to live according to the dictates of their conscience. However, you cannot have a society that flourishes with our documents if you do not have positive freedom, or freedom for. It's the combination of negative freedom and positive freedom that allows this constitutional republic to stand. When you have an individual that strives for the betterment of their community, that believes in their neighborhood. In fact, going back to Alexis de Tocqueville in his book, Democracy in America, he said that the one thing that separated America from every other nation was the zealous nature of the citizens in the local townships, especially in the North. He didn't see it in the South, he saw it in the North, where they cared so much about a pothole that they were engaged in the welfare of their city, going to the township council and making sure that that pothole would be fixed. He said, for this reason, the Americans don't govern from the top down. They govern from the bottom up. They tell their state legislators, they tell their members of Congress, this is how you're supposed to vote. He said he marveled at that fact. As a nation, we must work for the good of our communities. We must not shrink back from the political fights of our age. We must be engaged and invested in those conversations, and we must do so for the good of our children and our children's children, because if we leave those places vacant, if we have voter participation rates of less than 30%, like I'm seeing, and it's our side that's losing those battles because we will not go out and vote for a local election because it doesn't matter enough to us, we are not worthy of the Constitution and the documents that gave us so much freedom and success and prosperity. Our engagement is necessary. And I know I'm preaching to the choir tonight. I know all of you are here because you believe that ethic, but that message has to be shared. The apathy that we have in this nation grieves me when I go into a community and see a phenomenal city township candidate or city council candidate who is unable who gives everything he has and comes out and loses because the participation rate on our side was less than 30%. It grieves me to see that. We have amazing candidates in this room, having somebody that won that speaks to an awakening of people that need to be invested in the local township, city, or location where they may be. So how do those all tie together? Well, the answer is this. If you do not have a people of faith, you will not have fathers that stay in their homes. You will not have fathers whose hearts are bound to their children and children to their fathers. You will not have children who live virtuous lives, who abide by the laws, the 10 commandments written on their hearts so that they know what is right or wrong without somebody having to tell them. If you do not have faith, you will not have a people that are willing to do good for their neighbor, willing to do what is best for somebody else, willing to stay focused on the assignment, sacrificing the temptations of this earth. If you do not have a people that is virtuous, a people that live according to the dictates of their conscience, that advance the good, that which is good and beautiful and true in our communities, do not have a people that follow and abide by the law, you cannot have freedom, because freedom requires people that are virtuous. Otherwise, if we start to have people acting out in the streets, mob rule, murder, pillage, plunder, you're going to have to increase the scope of government to defend whoever they think needs, or whoever requires defending. And usually that step of tyranny leads to a form that is incredibly dangerous for the whole. And finally, you cannot have, without freedom, you cannot have flourishing faith. The beginnings of our republic depended upon the ability for George Whitfield to go and speak freely. He could go to nations throughout the earth and would not have had that same liberty to go and preach into the fields for the thousands to come out. Look at North Korea and Iran. Now, God can do marvelous things, and he's working tremendously through the persecuted church. But freedom has given us as a nation the ability to send more missionaries than ever in the history of the world to the nations of the earth. Our freedom has given us the ability to send more money to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars over the course of our existence to nations throughout the world and our own communities. Freedom gives us the ability to have flourishing faith in this nation. And that is the golden triangle of freedom. I believe that if we can communicate faith, family, and freedom and its importance into America today, we have the ability to persuade the millennial soul, because the millennial that's raising a child wants the best for their children. One of the early founders in America who wrote, Thomas Paine, Common Sense. Thomas Paine was not a believer in God. He was an atheist. You can read some of the documents later in his life, and there was much debate over his life. But one thing Thomas Paine believed is that faith and flourishing faith was a good thing for America. He knew that if we had people that would flourish in faith, in that formula that I just talked about, faith, family, freedom, it too would flourish. We can share with millennial friends, even if they disagree with the dictates of the conscience of faith, they should be rooting for people of faith, because it will help us and their children thrive for generations to come. That leads me to my final point tonight, and that's simplify rather than complicate. Excuse me, I already said that one. So that leads me to my final point, which is unify rather than divide. So unify rather than divide. The first one, what I said was persuade versus debate, persuade rather than debate, simplify rather than complicate. And then finally, it's unify rather than divide. So I have a quick story for you. I was chairman of the party. I mentioned it earlier. This is before I decided to write Bellwether Blues. And I received a call from my assistant who was at the post office, and he was mailing slate cards. Now, we spend thousands of dollars on slate cards because they're critical in making sure that our voters know who they should vote for, who's on the Republican ticket. So it's thousands of dollars in cards, and it's thousands of dollars of postage. And he's standing at the line, and he had to set out the trays with all these thousands of cards out in the main lobby, keeping an eye on them while he went in to pay into the main room. And he takes a glance over, and he sees all of a sudden all this commotion out in the lobby. And he sees this young man with red in his face, very obviously visibly angry, taking the cards and throwing them into a trash receptacle by the handful, moving and just dozens and dozens and dozens, as many as he can. And he's just so angry and frustrated. So he calls me up and asks me what he should do. And my immediate response is, go stop him. This is a lot of money. So he eventually does that, but I don't know what's happening back at the post office. I get on the line and I get in my car to drive to the post office to stop what was going on from going on. So I call the sheriff of our county. I say, hey, is what this guy's doing wrong? I mean, it feels like a crime, right? And he's like, duh, yeah, this is like tampering with federal mail. It's a federal crime that could be punishable by significant sentences. So I knew I had the power of the law behind me. And he said, hey, I'll have a unit ready to dispatch upon your call to me. So have me on speed dial. So I did. I arrived there about 5 minutes after our phone call, and I saw this mess out in the lobby with all these cards all over the place. Our slate cards all messed up. And I'm like, where did they go? There's nobody here. And then I look inside the lobby, and there's this long line, and there's my assistant standing in the line. And I'm like, well, he's by himself. So where's this kid? I thought he had run away. And it's like, oh, great, we lost the perpetrator of the crime. But I looked just in front of him, and there's this taller kid who's angry and frustrated standing next to my assistant. So my assistant at minimum was successful at getting him to stop and come into the post office with him. But I was not sure exactly what was going to happen. I thought maybe my assistant, maybe he had seen the kid go in there and was kind of just tagging him or tailing him. I didn't know. So I decided I'm going to go in there and make a big scene, which is exactly what I did. And I said, hey, are you the kid that took all the stuff out of this? Took all of our slate cards and threw them in the trash? That's a federal crime. I have the sheriff on the line. Well, his face turned from anger into fear in about a second. So I knew I had him, and I knew that all the post office personnel would come out, because I made a pretty big commotion, and people were looking like there's a fight that's going to go down or something. So the post office personnel come out and they asked me, hey, do you want to elevate this? And I said, hold on, let's try to understand what's going on. And the kid comes out, and now he becomes pretty cooperative because of the threat of going to prison. And I could tell he was probably a college student. It's in Bowling Green, so BGSU's right there. So as he's picking up all the cards, I had an idea that came into my mind. And I think it's an idea that if we slow down just a little bit and not let our anger get the best of us, sometimes the best ideas come in the most important moments. So I walk outside after he's finished cleaning up the slate cards, and I said, hey, I have an idea. Instead of me taking you right now to the sheriff's office or them coming picking you up and you having to go before a judge, if you agree to have lunch with me next week, I'll drop all the charges. We won't do anything. He was a wise man. He said, yeah, I'll come and have lunch with you. So he did. He showed up the next week, and we had a conversation for about 2 hours. And he explained to me that what motivated him, one, he had issues with not having a father in the home. He was angry. He was seeing things on social media about Republicans being bigoted, racist, and he wanted to take action. So he took action, and that's exactly what he did. It was a moment where he let himself go. But for the first time in his life, he was able to sit down and listen to somebody that could present to him a different worldview with a different conviction and understanding as to why conservatism is the best formula for what we believe the future is. But at minimum, even if he didn't eventually agree with me in my political beliefs, he knew that there was compassion behind it. So when I stood before the Lincoln Monument, and there the 26-foot statue of Abraham Lincoln, those of you that have been to the Lincoln Memorial know what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful statue and has beautiful words etched in the sides of the wall. As you look up at Abraham Lincoln, there's 2 features about him that stand out to me. One is his right hand. His right hand is formed like this. You see this kind of fist shape, and it's clenched. And if you take a look at his right leg, it's pushed back in a position where it's like he's ready to take aim or ready to crouch or ready to move. That side of Abraham Lincoln represents justice. The other side of Abraham Lincoln, you see his foot loosened a little bit, relaxed just a little bit, and he has kind of an open hand shaped like an L, A-L, by the way, in sign language. And that loosened shape represented his side of grace. John 1:17 said Jesus came full of grace and truth. The Abraham Lincoln in many ways represent the embodiment of grace and truth in this nation at a time when we most needed it. And when I delivered grace and truth, I didn't compromise or back down from the fact that he had committed a crime, but I came at that crucial moment with grace that he had never before perhaps experienced. It changed his life, and I dare say it changed mine. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow these grounds. The soldiers living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor powers to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it will never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated to the great unfinished work that they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be dedicated to that unfinished task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that these men shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Who has anybody have a question for John? John, would you repeat the age of millennials for me, the dates?
Yeah, 25 to 40, 1981 to 1996.
1981 to 96. Questions? Anybody have a question they want to ask for John? John, how long did it take you to write the book?
It probably took a year. So when I first had the idea of writing it, I knew I needed to get it drafted and get it on paper, and then my friend Michael Hamilton runs Kakama Editing. So it probably took another 6 to 9 months to edit it. So in some, it probably took about, I would say, not 20 months to finish it.
Right here. Hold on just a second, please.
I'm Susan. Hi. I was trying to understand, you said that we cannot win the millennials by logic, by reasoning. And I think what you described was we have to reach them by what their needs are. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say not by logic alone. So I
Okay.
would complement the two, because you can't just come in with
Okay.
an emotional hug and not deliver facts. You got to be
Okay.
able to complement both.
Okay, so the emotional part is relating to their situation. I mean, I'm just trying to understand the approach that you
Yeah,
were-
so,
and honestly, we want to be in relationship with whomever we
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
talk to.
I think that the biggest thing that I would use, is I use this term in the book, is a currency of trust. You want to have a currency of trust that you develop with them. And if you come at them
Okay.
immediately with political arguments, that trust might not be built up yet to have the conversation that is necessary for them to hear what you want to say.
Okay, yeah, great, thanks.
Thanks for the question.
Who else has a question for John about his book or anything about millennials? Okay, it's right here.
Hi, my name's Ken John. First, thank you very much for coming to speak to us and giving it your all, especially with the challenges that your family's facing right now, especially your grandmother. I have 3 millennials and 2 Generation Z in my family. What's the difference between those two generations? Are the Generation Zers much more left of center than the millennials? And so what's your experience been?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I appreciate your comment there. So I didn't study Gen Z as much, but I read about it, obviously, in the process of looking through the demographics. One thing I would say is I had the privilege of meeting Oz Guinness, and he's one of the people I interviewed. He has some amazing books and content. He, like Alexi de Tocqueville, comes from England and has this interesting perspective. But he made the argument that we shouldn't measure in generations. We should actually measure in ages, and age is like 100 years. And he thought generationalism, which was introduced after World War II, was done really for consumerism in order to divide and segment the markets to maximize the profit of companies. So he said that's when generationalism came about. So I would first say this: humans are humans, all human beings. And one of the things that I think we assume is naturally as human beings, whatever side you're on, is you can't persuade somebody. They've already made up their mind. And what I talk about in Bellwether Blues through some of the research that's been done in like quantum physics, for example, is there's this radical element of free will that we all have. So the first thing we have to know and believe is that, yes, you can persuade them. So that goes for Gen Z or millennials. Now, I think your question more goes to the heart of, is there a difference in terms of their political persuasion today? And the answer is mixed. There's mixed evidence. Yes, they seem to be leaning more to the left, as some data has shown. And there's one group I would encourage you to check out called the Center for Generational Kinetics. They get deep into the differences between those two generations specifically as it relates to the economy. And I would make the argument that Gen Z, although maybe more left of center because millennials are not having kids, they actually have a more conservative fiscal philosophy in terms of investments, because they've seen how millennials have wrecked their lives with debt. So one kind of encouraging silver lining on some of the research that I've seen with Gen Z.
Here's another question right here.
Hi, I'm Randy. Nice to meet you. I was looking at your three ideas about persuade, simplify, and unify. And I kind of thought of persuade. I wanted to get your take on what I'm going to say. Persuade, another way to persuade is to stimulate curiosity. In other words, find ways of stimulating what they're curious about. The second thing, simplify, recognize that millennials, due to the fast pace of what they're exposed to, is their attention span is oftentimes really short. And the third thing, unify, not divide, find points of common ground.
Yeah, very good. So in terms of the first and second to me are somewhat similar in that stimulation absolutely is critical, but the best way to stimulate is by asking questions. That's how you stimulate thought. And there's a lot of research that goes into that I talk a little bit about. So stimulate by asking questions, deliver resources that are going to help them work through those questions. So I recommend after the conversation that you built the currency of trust, sending them like a 5-minute PragerU video on a subject that you talked about. As you've listened to them and maybe they talked about immigration, the wall or whatever, the wall's racist, find a video from PragerU that's 5 minutes that talks about that subject precisely, and then send it to them, because now you've stimulated a thought with a question and you've added a very short resource given what you just said, which is 100% true. As millennials, we're in front of phones and screens all day long. Everything comes in bite-sized pieces, so our attention spans are much shorter than they ever used to be, which is a challenge. So you want to give them something that fits in that pace of life. And then remind me of the third question. Yeah.
Find points of common ground.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Very, very well said. And there was a book that I referenced that talks about how to handle crucial conversations. And those that are most gifted at crucial conversations, by the way, seem to flourish the most in companies, the private sector especially. So being able to handle crucial conversations means you have this common ground that you share with the person you're talking to. They use it as like a reference of a pool, that you don't take water out of the pool, you keep water in the pool. And in the process of ensuring that it stays there, you know what the eventual outcome is, or the desired outcome is of the conversation. When you do that, you handle the conversation in such a way that that common ground leads to some objective that follows. I agree. Thanks, Randy.
Let's thank our speaker for coming tonight. Thank you, John. And John, what's grandma's name again, so we can say a prayer for her? Helen, thank you very much. And really sorry we didn't get to meet Levi tonight. Got a little book for him, how to catch a turkey, and tell him we hope to see him next time at Empower You. Thanks. Once again, a round of applause. Just a couple things I wanted to share with you. I said I met John up in Bucyrus, which is kind of in the middle of the state. Has anybody seen the special Tucker Carlson's done on wind farms? On wind farms. So I was up in Bucyrus, and one of the tables, information tables, was a map of Ohio showing the 634 wind farms and the damage it has done to Ohioans everywhere. And it was a stunning story for me. I'm trying to get them to come and speak to Empower You. It was really quite an incredible story. I'm so glad it's not here. Yes, that sounds good. A couple other things real quick. I don't know if anybody has anybody in their family thinking about homeschooling. We had an incredible session Saturday about homeschooling. I really encourage you, if your family's thinking about pulling their children out of the public education system, to watch that class. It was fantastic. A couple other things. I'm happy to say that Janine K is the winner online of the book tonight. So Janine, we'll get that to you. Congratulations. Thanks for attending. Yeah. Let's give her a round of applause. And finally, our class tomorrow night, we've got 2 classes in a row, 2 nights because of the election. I'm just really looking forward to it. It's on Booker T. Washington and also the backpack bill. The first 2 classes that the Ashland University people have taught for us, the first one was on Thomas Jefferson. I learned so much from that class about Thomas Jefferson that has just stuck with me. And the second class was on Alexander Hamilton. And just the way that class was spun and how closely Alexander Hamilton was aligned with George Washington was fascinating. So I can't wait to see tomorrow's class. I think it's really going to be great. I hope you'll think about attending, and thanks for coming tonight to empower you, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you.